Hey, Larkin Rose here. First of all, I wanted to mention that for today and tomorrow, as in the last 2 days of June, I'm still doing the book deal where you can get 4 signed copies of The Most Dangerous Superstition for $60, which includes shipping to anywhere in the U.S., or 14 signed copies of The Most Dangerous Superstition for $180, which again includes shipping to anywhere in the U.S. That's good until the very end of June, midnight on the 31st. So if you want that deal, look at the description below. It says the ways to send payment and send me an address so I can send you books. Yeehaw. Now, I want to do a quick video about something that I often see when debating or talking to statists, which is we have the system we have, which is immoral and destructive and insane. And often the response to the idea of not having a ruling class is, well, I'm not sure how this will work and how would we deal with that? And the implication is that, and I'm sure most of you have seen this as well, the implication is that, well, if you can explain how everything's going to work perfectly without a ruling class, well then by default we just revert back to whatever we already have. And so people sort of gloss over the fact that, like, if you're, and I've pointed this out before, if you're not a voluntarist, you're an involuntarist. Like, those are the options. A voluntarist is someone who advocates that all human interaction be based on consent. Like voluntary organization and cooperation instead of coercion. Government is always coercion. So if you're voluntarist, you're automatically an anarchist. And if somebody says, well, I'm not sure how it would work, the part of it that not only do they not say, but they don't even think, is that, oh, I'm not sure how things would work if there wasn't a ruling class, therefore I'm going to keep advocating a ruling class. And when I say, if you're opposed to anarchism, you're advocating authoritarian domination, they're like, what are you talking about? It's like, what's the other option? Like, the options are rule by no one or rule by someone. Rule by no one is anarchy. That's what the word means. Rule by someone, there's lots of different flavors of authoritarian domination, whether you're talking about a constitutional republic or a monarchy or fascism or communism or whatever else. But if you're objecting to the idea of not having a ruling class, then you're obviously advocating the existence of a ruling class. But they don't say that, and they don't argue that, and they don't even think that, because when I point it out, they're just like, well, you just haven't shown me how everything will work. And they don't get that you're the one personally advocating violent aggression against your neighbors because you're not sure how things would work otherwise. And this is another example of how statism, doesn't apply if they were, in the island scenario I often use. Because if there were 100 people stuck on an island, they just got shipwrecked or something, and they're like, well, I'm not quite sure how we would organize things without a government, therefore, I'm going to advocate that one of us be given the right to violently dominate everybody else. Nobody would say that. So people can default back to the system we have, well, we're not going to change it, as if it's just this thing happening, and it doesn't count as condoning evil if you just sort of passively let it happen because you're not sure what ending it would look like. And to compare that to slavery, plenty of people have said this before me, but who will pick the cotton? If someone comes along and says slavery is really damn evil and should be ended immediately, if someone else had the argument, but who will pick the cotton if we don't have slaves, is that a valid argument? No, not in the slightest. On a moral matter, doesn't freaking matter who picks the cotton. Now, as it happens, they found a new way to pick the cotton with cotton gins and big harvesting machines and fun stuff like that. But that's not what mattered. What mattered is something heinously evil was going on and needed to end. And if somebody made that argument of who will pick the cotton, everybody would go, ugh, you're messed up. And yet that's exactly the mentality that most statists have in response to the idea of not having a ruling class is, well, how will this work and how will that work without a bunch of parasitic politicians forcibly robbing everybody and controlling everybody? And they sort of take no responsibility for the fact that if you're opposed to anarchism, you're in favor of a ruling class. If you're opposed to voluntarism, you're in favor of involuntarism. That's the other option. There's lots of different kinds of involuntarism, but you have to be somewhere on the involuntarist spectrum if you're not a voluntarist. And to go one step further, the fact that these people are, even if they're voting for it, then yeah, you're directly trying to empower people to do authoritarian garbage. And to turn around and say, oh, I'm not sure how things would work otherwise, like that doesn't relieve you of the responsibility for being a direct enabler of evil. But even just in words, even somebody, if they're not voting, but they just, well, yeah, I think we need a blah, blah, blah republic that does this and just taxes people for the necessary yada, yada. Like, you're condoning it with your words. That's already pretty bad. And the fact that the thing that you're saying we can't do away with, government, parasitic ruling class, is doing horrendously nasty things here and all over the world. They're doing it in your name, like they say they're representing you, and you're funding it and advocating it. Now, you can complain about the outcome, which most statists do. They say, well, I don't think they should be doing this or that, but we definitely need a ruling class. Well, like, you agreed to have a ruling class, now it's not up to you what they do, because you're not in charge. You're not the emperor. You wanted something above you, forcibly controlling everybody. You got it. Like, why do you think it's up to you what they're going to do? But the fact that if you're making excuses for that, again, using the analogy, if somebody's making excuses for slavery because they don't know who will pick the cotton otherwise, you are, at least with your words, condoning evil, and statists just decide that that doesn't matter because they're like, well, it's what already is, so it's kind of okay, and you need to give me a reason to change it. And the fact that it's patently evil isn't a good enough reason, because I want you to, like, explain how every detail of everything is going to work perfectly without a ruling class before I will stop advocating the existence of a ruling class. And yet they take no responsibility for the actual outcome of the existence of a ruling class. And this is one of the things that representative government in all its insanity insulates people from the destruction that is a direct result of what they condone. And I've pointed this out before, that it's the irony of the statists will talk as if, well, we vote for them and it's the will of the people, which is a joke anyway. We vote for them, and they're representing us. They're serving us. They're acting on our behalf. And then you can point to just heinously evil things they're doing, and the person's like, oh yeah, that's a bummer. Too bad. Like, the things that everybody agrees are bad. And they're like, oh, bummer. What do you mean, oh, bummer? You made that happen. You empowered the monster that has been doing that all along and keeps doing that. You wanted it. You're an advocate of that. You can't suddenly pretend to be neutral when it comes to the abuse and the nastiness. It's like, well, I didn't vote for that. No, you just kept condoning the existence of a ruling class, which absolutely always does that. Like, oh, they're like harassing people and terrorizing people for not paying tribute to the ruling class. Yeah, that's what the IRS does. What did you think it was going to do? Like, if you supported a ruling class with a multi-trillion-dollar budget, you think they're just going to ask nicely? No, they're going to be violent. And so when people complain about the inevitable outcome of what they condone, it's just an extra level of insanity. Like, you're the one who helped make that happen. I mean, lots of other people helped make it happen too. But it's being done in your name, and you advocated the thing that's doing it. So it's as ridiculous as saying, well, you know, come home and your house is on fire. And your neighbor's like, oh yeah, that's so unfortunate. Well, do you know how it started? Yeah, I was having a campfire in your living room. I broke in and I was like lighting some furniture on fire. You did this? Well, I wasn't trying to burn your house down. It's like, yeah, but you personally did the thing that was gonna result in what happened, and now you're pretending like you're a passive observer. Like, that's every statist. When they point out the destruction created by government, like, you're the ones who made that happen. You're the ones who supported that. And when some of us come along and say there shouldn't be a ruling class, you're the ones who resist that. So now your house is on fire and you're grabbing a fire extinguisher and your neighbor's going, oh, don't do that, because I'm not sure how everything will turn out if you go in there with a fire extinguisher. Like, maybe there will be unforeseen consequences. Like, you made my house be on fire, and now you're opposing my efforts to make that not happen. And that's what most statists do, and they accept no responsibility for the destruction caused by the beast that they're defending. And then they do this weird thing of like, well, I don't like how government is now. We needed to do this and this and this. And every single time they describe a government that has never existed anywhere in the history of the world. It just serves the people. It's not corrupt. It just protects the innocent, especially minarchists. They love to do this. We just need a government that blah, 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 blah. And that's never happened anywhere in the world at any point in history. But you keep advocating the monster that's done horrendous things, and when some of us say that horrendous monster shouldn't be there, you defend the current version of it while objecting to the current version of it, because instead of saying, well, okay, yeah, that whole thing should go, you're like, well, we need government, we can't just do away with it completely. So you're defending the monster even while saying, well, yeah, it's kind of a monster, and I wish it was a different flavor of monster. And it's so weird to watch where somebody, and people, like, I know there's a big debate over, like, is voting violence? And I would actually say, well, voting is advocating violence. If you're trying to get someone into office who you know full well will use the violence of the state to rob and control people, which is pretty much every voter, then yeah, you're personally advocating specific violence against tons of people you don't know. But then people, even though they talk about it as if it represents us, they take no responsibilities. Like, the poor, civilians dying in the latest warmongering by the U.S. government and the military, that's a shame. It's like that. What you supported the thing that did that. You wanted it there, and when some of us say that shouldn't be there, you defend it. And then when you voted for the people who sent men with guns over there and bombers and all sorts of stuff to blow the crap out of some other country, you did that. You voted for that, and you know it. And then you talk as if it's an unfortunate outcome when you wanted that to happen. And this weird level of psychological denial that statists have, where they insist, it's bizarre, because they insist that voluntarists take personal responsibility for what they don't advocate and they're not doing, but which theoretically somebody might do in the absence of a ruling class. Like, it's my fault if anything goes wrong in a society that doesn't have a ruling class, because I advocate the absence of a ruling class. Like, I advocate voluntary, peaceful coexistence, but if some people decide to be violent, that will be my fault because I'm a voluntarist. Meanwhile, the statists who personally advocate the giant extortion racket and authoritarian monster that is actually out there victimizing and doing horrible things to people here and around the world, they're not responsible for it. That's not their fault. They just voted for it to happen, and then it did. So it's so weird, and you can see in it that so much of the motivation for believing in authority is the attempt to evade responsibility. Like, they go in and I've gone through this before. The voter goes, I'm not responsible for the outcome. I just voted. And the lawmakers, we're just representing the people. We just passed the law. We're not responsible. Don't blame us. And then the You know, the cops and the soldiers, we're just following orders, wasn't our idea, don't blame us. So you get this giant violent monstrosity, and nobody in the whole chain is accepting responsibility for the outcome. Whereas in a free society, in a voluntary society, you're responsible for what you do. There's no such thing as somebody beating up his neighbor and going, oh, I'm just following orders, don't blame me. Like, Fred told me to do that. Everybody would go, that doesn't make it okay, you jackass. You did it. You chose to do it. And what people want statism for is as an excuse to pretend that they're not responsible for the things that they do and the things that, or more specifically, the things that they condone government do on their behalf. And they even talk as if they're doing it on their behalf. And then when the outcome is nasty, they're like, oh, golly gee, that's unfortunate. And they don't even, and they're not intentionally lying. They don't even admit to themselves, you condone the system that did that. And then you're complaining about those of us who say that system shouldn't exist. There shouldn't be ruling classes. Well, then prove to me how everything in the world will work perfectly without it. Or by default, I'm going to keep advocating the destructive ruling class that did that horrible stuff and keeps doing that horrible stuff. So it's so weird to watch, and again, the island analogy demonstrates the difference, because in that setting, nobody would actually openly condone, let's take one of us and give him permission to violently dominate everybody else. But because this is the system they're accustomed to, they sort of view that as the default. Well, that's just what is, unless we do something different. And sometimes they'll actually say, well, that's the system we have. Like, that literally doesn't mean anything. It's like you catch someone committing murder. They say, oh, well, that's the system we have. It's like, people doing bad things doesn't become not bad just because you say, well, that happens. That's what's happening. Yeah, I'm murdering people, but that's what's happening, so whatever. That's not a defense. And this is the system we have while you're personally advocating a system of violent domination and extortion. Doesn't make it okay that you're advocating that. And the fact that other people advocate it doesn't make it okay either. But you can see so often in the way statists argue that they're desperately trying to evade all responsibility for the outcome, even of things that they personally condoned and advocated, and then falling back on cheering for authoritarian domination if you can't spell out for them every detail of how everything would work without that. And it's weird to watch. And once again, it just shows the utter insanity built into statism. Yeehaw.